Alright, so I wanted to go over the installation and wiring for these custom 2013 to 2016 Ford Fusion headlights. They're the Mustang style, so they have the Gills, dual projectors, dedicated high beam, and a low beam that also is a bifunctional high beam. So the wiring basically consists of two components. You'll get two boxes here. One box is for the demon eyes, as they have a demon eye in each projector, so that's quad demon eyes. And then the second box is the drivers and control for the Gills. So these Gills run as a DRL, parking light, as well as a sequential turn signal with full color control for show modes and all that good stuff. So let's go over that. Alright, so starting with the demon eyes, you'll have three individual wiring harnesses here. So we'll start with the first one. Everything is labeled on every connector, so there's basically no way to go wrong. Something plugs into something and they're both labeled the same. That goes for the connectors on the back of the headlight as well. Alright, so this here is the Bluetooth controller. So this is for the demon eyes. Starting with the Bluetooth controller, you basically have a plug, which is a quick disconnect plug that goes to two leads. One's to the battery, 12 volts, and the other is a ground. I suggest using the ground bolt on top of the strut tower next to the battery. Then coming off of the controller, you have four outputs, which are all labeled Demon Controller. Alright, so that is the Bluetooth controller. Power and ground with four outputs. Then you have two drivers. They are both exactly the same. So on the drivers, right, you have two wires coming off one end, and you have three wires coming off the other. So let's start with the two wires. The two wires coming off of the Demon Eye drivers, you have labeled Demon 1 and Demon 2. They are exactly the same. So looking at the back of the headlights, you'll notice on the driver's side headlight, you also have the same two looking connectors called Demon 1 and Demon 2. So that's what plugs into that. On the other side of the driver, like I said, you have three connections. You have these two that are the same, that are labeled Demon Controller. They plug into the controller on two of the four Demon Controller outputs. Alright. The third connector on the side of the driver is labeled ground. So that goes to a ground bolt. There's multiple ground bolts behind each headlight. So again, this here would be the driver for the driver's side headlight. And the only difference between this driver that I'm calling for the driver's side headlight and this driver that I'm going to say is for the passenger side headlight is it has an extension wire that allows it to run from the passenger side headlight across the front of the car and plug into the controller. All right, so let's go over it again, but we'll go over the passenger side. So here you have the passenger side driver. Again, you have two wires coming out the one end, and you have three wires coming out the other end. So if we go over the two wires first, again, you'll see that they're both called Demon 3 and Demon 4. And if you look on the passenger side headlight, you'll see there's two of those connectors called Demon 3 and Demon 4. Now looking at the other three connectors coming off of this driver, again, you have two of the same, but you can see compared to the other driver's side headlight driver we just went over, these have a lot longer cords. They have extensions on them that basically extend them, so you can run these from the passenger side headlight across the front of the car to plug into the remaining two outputs here labeled Demon Controller. So these two Demon Controllers for the passenger go to the Demon Controller outputs here on the Bluetooth controller. And again, you have that third last connector labeled ground that you just want to put to a ground bolt. All right, so what I've done here is I've basically connected both Demon Eye drivers to the Demon Eye Bluetooth controller. So there's minimal hookups required once this is received. Again, you would give the Bluetooth controller power and ground with these two leads. You would then take the two longer extensions off of the outputs here. That would be your passenger side headlight driver. These two off of that connect to the back of the passenger side headlight, and you want to ground this wire. Same thing for the driver side. You have these two shorter ones that are connected already. Then at the end of that driver, you have these two, which connect to the driver side headlight. And then you have that last third ground wire, which is this. Connect that to a ground bolt. Now let's go over the Gills and the required drivers and connections for that. So it's a very similar concept. You're going to have 3 different wiring harnesses. You're going to have 2 drivers, one for the driver side headlight, one for the passenger side headlight, as well as a Bluetooth controller. So let's start with the Bluetooth controller like we did for the Demon Eyes. All right, so very similar situation here. You have your Bluetooth controller, which has a quick disconnect connector here for power. Off of this power connection, you'll see 3 leads. You'll see one that's labeled parking, which goes to the back of your driver's side headlight here, which has a connector for that called parking. You have a ground, which you should put to the same ground bolt on the strut tower, or any ground bolt. However, I recommend for the Fusion platform using that strut tower bolt, as it's conveniently placed right next to the battery and everything will reach. And then lastly, you have this extended connection here, which goes to a fuse tap. So this is what you want to tap into your fuse box right there next to the battery, and you want to leverage the run start fuse, right? That's what's going to power the Gills to act as a DRL whenever the car is running. Off of the Bluetooth, you have the same thing like you saw for the Demon Eyes. You have 4 outputs. You only have to leverage 2 of them. That's why only 2 are labeled. You can see they're labeled Gill controller. So that leads us to the drivers. So if we look at the first driver here, all right, you have two connections coming off the one end and 2 connections coming off the other end. So these 2 connections labeled Gill controller, I'm sorry, this connection labeled Gill controller connects to your Bluetooth controller. This connection here labeled turn goes to the back of the headlight. That's called turn. There's one on each headlight. And this connection here, these 2 are labeled Gill 1 and Gill 2, which you'll see on the back of the headlight are labeled Gill 1 and Gill 2. Same thing goes for the other driver for the passenger side, right? It's the same exact thing, except you have a longer extension here to reach the passenger side. That's the only difference. So let me hook this all up here, and then we'll go over it one more time with it all hooked up. Okay, so here's the Gill Bluetooth controller hooked up to both the drivers, and therefore you only have to hook up the connections off the end of the driver to each headlight. So you have the Bluetooth controller, which goes down to 3 power leads. One's a ground, one's labeled parking, that goes into the back of the driver's side headlight, labeled parking. And the last one, the third one here, is the fuse tap that goes in your fuse box. Off the outputs, you have the driver's side driver, that's connected already. Then you have this connection here labeled turn, that goes into the back of the driver's side headlight, labeled turn. And then you have these 2 labeled Gill 1 and Gill 2, which goes to the back of the driver's side headlight labeled Gill 1 and Gill 2. Same exact thing for the passenger side, except the only difference is it's longer here because it needs to be able to run across the front of the car from the passenger side headlight. But the connections are all exactly the same. Alright, everything is hooked up, so now we will go over the core headlight functions. So of course you have your parking lights, then we can trigger the turn signal on the passenger side. Parking lights off, turn signal on the driver's side, low beams, low beams off, high beams, start the car, which would trigger the DRL, low beams, we'll turn on the halos along with the amber side marker. Parking lights off, turn signal, turn off the car. Now let's grab our phone, let's turn on the demon eyes. Now let's say you want to go to a show, you want to mess around with the gills, so you would power on your parking lights. Go back to the phone, select the gills, change colors there. Match the demon eyes with the parking lights, or you can run them separate if you'd like. Trigger the turn signal on this side.